Thank you so much for coming out. This is the High Impact Tea. My name is Philip Hyun. I'm a director of High Impact Tea. This is an event that we put on with Impact at Anderson. And today we're so lucky to have Estelle Reyes, SVP of Enhancing Community with LACI. Estelle Reyes is the SVP of Enhancing Community at the Los Angeles Cleantech Incubator, where she's focused on ensuring that underrepresented groups are engaged in the clean tech and sustainability sector. Through her work on LACI's Diversity and Inclusion Initiative, she is building programming to recruit promising diverse clean tech entrepreneurs, as well as workforce development training to build a diverse talent pipeline for the rapidly growing green job market. Passionate about equity, she is also working with her team to launch clean tech pilots to disadvantaged communities. Prior to LACI, Estelle was the executive director at the Network for Teaching and Entrepreneurship, Greater LA, where she played a central role in launching and growing the NFTE programs to reach over 12,000 students locally. She also has experience as a financial analyst at Goldman Sachs Private Wealth Management Division, as well as a first grade teacher. Estelle holds a bachelor's degree in neuroscience from Brown University and a master's degree from the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Today, Bhavna is going to be moderating the conversation with Estelle. And with no further ado, please welcome Estelle and Bhavna.
Since 2011, LACI's been focused on helping clean tech startups and growing the green economy. For the last 2 decades, I've been working with citizens and cities to fight climate change. Now I've turned my attention to helping companies. Our 3 priorities are advancing zero-emissions transportation, clean energy, and smart city solutions. We want to inspire you to come up with the next big idea to fight climate change.
We're making new ways to light up LA.
We give people a smarter way to commute.
We make tableware that's good for people and good for the planet.
We're transforming air travel by building quiet, zero-emission planes.
We want to reduce America's dependence on foreign oil and create a world powered by renewable energy.
LACI will continue the work it's known for, supporting clean tech startups and helping them commercialize their technologies.
Measuring our company's efforts on climate action and helping maximize their impact.
But we can do more.
The core DNA of LACI isn't just about creating clean tech startups. We're building an inclusive green economy by unlocking innovation through incubation, transforming markets, and enhancing community.
We're building relationships with industry leaders in key technology sectors.
Developing pilot projects in mobility and clean energy.
We'll engage the innovative spirit of LA's creative community.
Will provide the spark for future entrepreneurs and the leadership LA will need when facing the challenges of the future.
Building a future that belongs to all of us.
And create a clean tech ecosystem that looks like the people of LA.
Simply put, we can't do this without you.
Whether you bring your financial support,
your knowledge and networks,
or just bring yourself,
you belong here.
Join this adventure.
This energy.
This community.
We're building an inclusive green economy for the people of Los Angeles.
And if we can make it happen here,
we can make it happen everywhere.
Join us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your support.
Thank you so much, Phil, and thank you so much, Bhavna and Kelly and the whole UCLA Anderson team for having me. I thought it was very cool that you have a high impact tea series, so I'm very honored to be here today. So good afternoon. As Phil shared, I am the SVP of Enhancing Community at LA Cleantech Incubator, or LACI, or LACI for short. And I wanted to share just a little bit by way of background. So LACI is a nonprofit organization focused on building an inclusive green economy through 3 strategies. The first is unlocking innovation through incubating promising clean tech startups. The second is transforming markets through public-private partnership focused on accelerating key initiatives in transportation, energy, and sustainable cities. And then finally, enhancing community, which is the work that my team and I focus on to ensure that underrepresented groups are engaged at every clean tech stage. So from the ideation stage to the workforce stage to deployment. In terms of our work, we're very focused on impact. So our three key areas of focus are, as I shared earlier, transportation, zero emissions transportation, 100% clean energy, and then smart and sustainable cities, so that we can impact LA's GHG emissions, social equity and air quality, and finally jobs and the economy. In terms of our achievements to date, all of our work as an incubator has generated about $375 million in long-term economic value for the city of LA. We were ranked a top 10 incubator by the UBI Index since 2014. We've worked with 72 portfolio companies that have created approximately 1,700 jobs. And then in terms of the work we're doing to track our diversity and inclusion work, 47% of our portfolio companies are led by people of color. 32% of our companies are led by women. And then in terms of our LACI staff internally, 53% of them are women and 53% identify as staff of color. So as part of our overall Enhancing Community initiative, we launched our diversity and inclusion work in November 2016, focused on bringing in more women, people of color, and other underrepresented groups into the clean tech sector and overall tech industry. So one of the first steps we did was to form this Diversity and Entrepreneurship Advisory Council that's comprised of community leaders in academia, in some of our portfolio company founders represented, investors, so that we were really creating programming that was informed by the community for the community. We also administered a demographic survey to get a baseline understanding of where we were and where we wanted to move the needle. And then finally, we secured funding from JP Morgan Chase, the Small Business Administration, LA Department of Water and Power, Metro, the LA Coalition for the Economy and Jobs to launch this important work. So over the past 2+ years, we've made significant progress around diversifying our portfolio company founders. So this first set of bars is from ICIC, which stands for the Initiative for a Competitive Inner City. They've put together a study that evaluated 8 high-tech incubators and accelerators across the country. And they found 20% of them were led by women, 23% of them were led by people of color. When we launched our diversity and inclusion work at LACI in November 2016, we already outperformed that baseline benchmark. So we were at 24% female founders, 38% people of color founders. And then where we are at the beginning of this year, 2019, 32% female and then 47% people of color. And because we've already exceeded the benchmark, we've created stretch goals to further propel our growth. So in terms of 2019 goals, goal number 1 is to build an inclusive organizational culture, making sure that we're really walking the walk around our D&I values and really giving everyone an opportunity to shine. And the reason why this is super important is if you don't get the inclusion piece right, it doesn't matter how many diverse people you bring in. If they don't feel like they belong, they will leave and you'll lose all the work that you're putting into your D&I work. So some of the activities we are doing, we administered last year our very first inclusion survey. So we administered that to both LACI staff and our portfolio company staff. And it tracked employee engagement around topics like fairness, belonging, voice, decision making. So we could really identify where we were outperforming and areas that we needed to grow. And then we also formed a monthly founders group so that our portfolio company founders could gather together and really share ideas, best practices, and support one another. Our second goal is focused on building a more diverse entrepreneur and workforce pipeline. So we're really making sure that we're consciously and actively engaging underrepresented groups. For our entrepreneur pipeline, we are actually going out into our communities and building relationships with key organizations that have visibility towards promising diverse clean tech entrepreneurs. We also have a Women in Clean Tech program that's focused on bringing in more women into the clean tech sector and is helping us to identify more female founders. And then in terms of workforce diversity, we're actually building out a talent pipeline and starting young. So we actually have a high school field trip program in partnership with LADWP and LAUSD to bring in, last year we brought in about 500 high school students on campus just to learn more about jobs in the sector and learn about incubators. So it's just really just planting seeds for long-term green jobs. And then if they're interested, we offer college internships. We have a partnership with a number of different local colleges to help students get their foot in the door and get experience working with us. Historically, about 30% of our college interns have actually gotten job offers with us or our portfolio companies, so it's a great way to get in. And then finally, we have workforce development programs. So on our campus, we have an advanced prototyping center with a machine shop, electronics lab, a welding shop. So we're leveraging those on-campus assets to generate workforce development programs to prepare people with training for the green economy. And then we also acknowledge that there's incredible diverse talent already there. So we are embedding best practices and hiring for diversity into our entire process. And then finally, we want to acknowledge that it's not just about bringing more diverse groups into our campus. We want to make sure that we're leveraging our assets, our resources, our technology to benefit our communities at large. So our third goal is to launch clean technology pilots in disadvantaged communities. So as one example, we are partnered with Community Healing Gardens at Markham Middle School in Watts to deploy our clean tech into the garden and then educate the students and surrounding community about sustainability. So this project was actually part of the Watts Rising Collaborative, which was awarded $35 million from the Transformative Climate Communities program. So we're super excited about the great work to come here. There's a number of ways we would love to get you all involved in our work at LACI. The first is, have any of you ever been there before or heard about us? Okay, a couple of you. Okay, so thank you. For those of you who have not been, this is an open invitation to all of you to come visit. We are located in downtown LA's Arts District, and we offer campus tours every Friday at noon. So would love to welcome you. The second way to get involved is if anyone's interested in learning more about job opportunities with LACI or our portfolio companies, you can go to our website, laci.org, and there's an opportunities link at the top. And then finally, if you just would like to stay in touch or have any specific questions for me, here's my contact information, and would love to get more engaged with all of you.
So I'm going to ask, I have a few questions that I'm curious about, and then I want to keep this informal as always. So if you guys have burning questions, keep them lined up, because I'll open it up for audience questions pretty quickly. So I wanted to talk to you first about the benchmarking that you mentioned. Yes. So you mentioned ICIC as the main baseline that you looked at in comparison to where you guys are. Are there other targets that you look at as well? Are there City of LA targets that are assigned that LACI has to kind of is held to and things like that?
There isn't. I think that's what's been, it's interesting because I feel like diversity and inclusion is fairly new. So it's almost like, wow, gold star that you're actually even tracking it. So that's why we actually had trouble when we launched our initiative in terms of finding a benchmark, because it hasn't been long enough for people to be like, all right, this is exemplary, or this. So that's been more work in progress. So we actually had to identify our own benchmark. But to your point about just the benchmark in general, because we were outperforming, a couple of the things that we did in terms of pushing ourselves more in case there was a higher benchmark somewhere else was, so for the people of color benchmark, for example, if you sub-segregate the people of color founders, we are overrepresented by East Asians and South Asians. We do not have enough representation from Black or Latinx entrepreneurs. So trying to figure out, even within the people of color mix, ways to specifically focus on communities that are underrepresented within the people of color, if that makes sense. Yeah. And then within the women benchmark, we wanted to push ourselves, so we created a new benchmark, a stretch benchmark focused on female entrepreneurship in general in LA, which is much higher and is a stretch goal for us because clean tech in general already is a very slim portion of the overall tech sector and overall entrepreneurship space. So that's our aspirational goal for both.
Okay, wonderful. And I actually, speaking of that, I wanted to come back to some of the stats that you highlighted because it's really quite astounding. So 47% of LACI portfolio companies are run by people of color, 32% are run by women, and then more than 50% of staff, LACI staff, are women and people of color. I mean, that's pretty astounding stats, I think, to be having only started this initiative 2.5 years ago and have gotten there. So definitely kudos for that. And so you talked about, being ahead of the curve already and wanting to continue to have push goals and stretch goals. So what would success look to you then in terms of where would D&I feel like you've kind of gotten to a place where you want to get to?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for us, we want to make sure that the inside of our campus is reflective of the greater vibrant city of LA. So we have, based on that, we've taken a look at the LA census data and then just the working people of that census data. So we're trying to aspire towards actually mirroring our LA community inside our walls.
Right. And what are you finding in terms of going into communities? Are there certain communities that are more receptive? Are there others where there's still bridges that need to be built?
Yeah, I think for all the community work, what we've realized is the importance of meeting our communities where they are. So one thing that we've done is we actually have an open position right now for our Enhancing Communities team that's for a community engagement manager, because a lot of the work that we have been doing, because we've been so hyper-focused on the internal community and getting that right, we have not been able to have capacity to build bridges to get people here from partner organizations and CBOs externally. So that's going to be the main responsibility of this new person, is to build those bridges.
And what are you looking for in this position? For those of the MBAs in the audience, I know you're thinking it.
Yeah, so this person, we received 150 applications for this. So they closed it on the website, but just come talk to me if you're interested. So it's, the main role is to be the external facing community engagement person for LACI. So it would be to almost like do a landscape scan of all the partner organizations we need to be working with that we currently don't have any relationships with, that would be either feeders with us or work with us in our pilot programs or any of the number of programs I shared with you. And also to help us with executing on some of our community goals as it relates to the clean tech deployment in our communities.
So that's for now. We'll come back to the jobs and advice later. I also wanted to talk about, the founding of LACI. I don't know how many people know the history of that, so if you could speak to that a little bit, and then also speak to the continued relationship you have with the public sector and how that continues to operate.
Yeah, that's a great question. So LACI was founded in 2011 as an economic development initiative from Mayor Villaraigosa's office. So we're very closely tied to the city of LA. In fact, our current CEO, Matt Peterson, was the former chief sustainability officer for Mayor Garcetti. So we're very closely tied. Since 2011, we've spun off as our own independent 501c3, but our ties continue. So for example, La Cret's Innovation Campus, where LACI is housed, is actually owned by LA Department of Water and Power, who's co-located with us in the building. And this is the first incubator attached to a municipality that I know of on the planet. And I think this speaks to a really unique partnership because LA DWP is trying to adhere to mandates outlined by Mayor Garcetti's sustainability plan, right? So 50% local water, 100% renewable energy, removing coal from its energy portfolio. So it makes sense that DWP is right next to a clean tech incubator that has companies that are producing innovations that help them meet those mandates even faster. And then,
no, go ahead.
Yeah, and then one other component too, just in terms of continued public-private partnership. Last year, we released the first edition of what we call TEP, so it's a Zero Emissions Transportation Electrification Partnership for the year 2028 when the Olympics and Paralympics comes to LA. And it is a partnership between the city of LA, LADWP, Southern California Edison, BMW, Tesla, trying to figure out how we can all collaborate together to reach that zero emissions goal.
That's pretty impressive. And you had mentioned the LADWP. For those of you that have been to the space, have you been to it's like there's an innovation space where they test it out, right? Have you seen that?
Okay. So as part of your tour, when you come to visit, DWP has a customer engagement lab where you can learn more about how to become more sustainable in your own home through energy efficiency, water savings, and then they highlight what the future home, sustainable home will look like. It's actually pretty phenomenal, and our students who visit, that's their favorite part.
Yeah, it is. So definitely go visit.
Yeah.
I want to come back to your role with diversity and inclusion, and specifically your role within the portfolio companies at LACI. So how are you working with them, and how are you contributing to their vision of business as having what business means for society, essentially, business's role in society.
Yeah, that's a great question. So in terms of working with our portfolio companies, I want to say it's almost 2 layers. So around the diversity and inclusion piece, we want to make sure that LACI as a staff, that we get it right such that we can model it for our portfolio companies. So we want to embody what we aspire to in terms of the diversity and inclusion work such that we can support and inform the work that our portfolio companies are doing with their respective employees. So a lot of the work we're doing, the Enhancing Communities team with our portfolio companies, is number one, to help with recruitment and help just get them to the table. And then the second is to provide resources for our entrepreneurs, particularly our diverse entrepreneurs, to give them the resources to thrive.
Wonderful. I'm going to pause and look to the audience. If you guys have any burning questions right now, I, of course, can keep going, but I just want to see if you guys have anything kind of bubbling up right now that you want to ask.
You talked about the workforce diversity initiatives that you do, that you go out into the community. I'm curious how you measure success for those kinds of programs, and I don't know if there was ever to be, not as many funds available, how would you argue to, the rest of the senior leadership that these initiatives should be part of the budget?
Yeah, that's excellent. Well, thankfully, I'll answer the second part first. I'm very grateful that Matt and our leadership team are very supportive of all of the work we're doing around enhancing community, and especially our workforce development initiative. So last year, we actually got $1 million from the state of California to focus specifically on workforce development. So this enabled us to hire 2 new positions. So one position is our Director of Workforce Development, as well as a training coordinator. So we got some state funding for that. And then in terms of additional funds, we got some private funding from Wells Fargo, Annenberg Tech, and then LADWP to actually launch a specific pilot program that we're calling our APC Fellowship Program, APC standing for our Advanced Prototyping Center on campus. And the idea behind this program is to provide 50 participants from underrepresented groups. So these are folks who've completed some type of post-secondary education, but they're still unemployed or underemployed. It would provide them technical training in our Advanced Prototyping Center, and then, because we're an incubator, direct job opportunities with our portfolio companies or partner organizations. So we're excited. We're good for 2 years, but we have to hustle for the remaining. Yes.
Thank you as well for coming and speaking. Darylyn Roberts from Visage Energy. Question about, specifically you mentioned a lot of the disadvantaged community pilots that you're doing. What are some of the challenges that you face in kind of going into those communities and coming and sort of changing their perspective on energy use and also just deployment challenges and scaling up and things like that?
Yes, excellent point. So one of the things that we've noticed, and we've just embarked on this work around clean tech pilots, is that as part of the Watts Rising Collaborative for the Community Healing Tech Garden, we are very sensitive to the fact that we don't want to come in and say, hey, we're going to save you all and bring all these technologies, and we want to be very mindful that there's like all this richness and knowledge that already exists in our community. So we want to be able to really listen to them and meet them where they are. So as part of the Watts Rising Collaborative, there's actually a whole group that's focused on displacement avoidance and really making sure that the communities feel safe and included in the entire process, while all of these nonprofits are getting together to deploy or technologies or change streets or whatnot. So sorry, what was the other part of your question?
It was just, and what are some of sort of the challenges that you're facing?
Yes, so challenges that we're facing, question. I think a lot of it is also, if I think specifically about the Community Healing Tech Garden, a lot of it's like behavioral challenges, because a lot of our communities have not been aware of like a lot of the the technologies or habits that we're trying to encourage. So I think a lot of the work that we're doing in our classrooms for our middle school students to then share with their families is, when you have the AC on at your house, please close the windows so you don't lose that cold air. Or do you leave your water running while you're brushing your teeth? Like little things like that I feel like if we are able to start early, we can build much more sustainable households as they get older. Yeah.
I want to bring it back to when you first started and were tasked with this vision to create a diversity and inclusion initiative for LACI. How did you go about setting your objectives and goals, and was it sort of a collaborative process on identifying what the most important priorities are for LACI in terms of modeling its behavior among its staff? Just talk us through a little bit of like how you kind of started that whole process.
Yes. So when we first started, we really didn't have a roadmap. So we were just experimenting and trying a whole bunch of things. So I think what really helped us, as I shared earlier, was just the formation of the advisory council to make sure that we were guided by the community and the work we were doing. And then also just tracking and measuring, so we actually know if we're making any impact whatsoever. So getting the baseline demographics survey was super helpful. Since we launched the Diversity and Inclusion Initiative, there have been a bunch of resources that have come out. I'm like, had I had this in 2016, it would have been a lot easier. But for example, Lever has a D&I handbook that actually walks companies through how to become more diverse and inclusive. So over this process of learning and experimenting and making our own mistakes, there's been a lot of best practices that have bubbled up so that it can inform, future work around D&I. And then one thing I just wanted to highlight, USC Marshall created a case study about LACI's diversity and inclusion work, and it actually chronicles our very early days around some of the challenges that we had, pivots that we made, and then some of the best practices we learned so that it can inform other incubators who are also working to become more diverse and inclusive.
Oh, wow. And based on some of the best practices that are coming out right now, do you foresee sticking with this direction or needing to pivot again? And what do you see for the future?
Yeah, so even in 2019, so JP Morgan Chase has generously funded us ever since our inception, which is terrific. So we've been layering on year over year. So, 2017 was focused on diversity. 2018 was focused on inclusion. 2019, we're actually expanding our definition of diversity to also, it's in addition to including women and people of color, it's also going to include the LGBTQ and veteran communities. So figuring out how we can keep our baseline strong, but continuing to add and get stronger. And then in terms of just overall, I feel like D&I it's an ongoing process, and no matter how much work we do one year, it's almost like we have to start over again the next year. So we're constantly trying to figure out ways to engage our staff, doing workshops with organizations like Inclusion Ventures, trying to find other partner organizations that can help support us to keep us going year over year.
Wonderful. And I want to come back to your 3 goals that you talked about and ask you about the first one, creating an inclusive organizational culture. What is that starting to look like in the businesses that you are working with?
Yes, so we are just at the beginning phase of this. Maybe I'll highlight what we're doing first with LACI and then how we're working that with our businesses. So we partnered with a company called Culture Amp, which is based in the Bay Area, and they have a special platform that measures employee engagement. So we worked with them to deploy an inclusion survey to LACI staff and our portfolio company staff. So within LACI staff, what we noticed was that people love the mission, they love coming to work, they really enjoy the people they work with. Those were our high points in terms of being a mission-driven organization. The areas that we could grow were decision-making. People didn't know how decisions were made. They were not communicated effectively. They did not feel like they were part of the decision-making process. So because of that, we came together as a leadership team to figure out, all right, how are we going to tackle this? So one of the things we did was we formed cross-collaboration groups across the entire organization. So you had someone from finance working with someone from facilities, working with someone from the incubating team to really figure out why are we unhappy with how decisions are made here? And each of the teams created prototypes to address decision making in general, how they would provide a solution to that challenge. And so based on that, our leadership team picked 1 or 2 to actually implement. So we're implementing feedback from our entire team around how to address a problem area. So that's what we're doing with our LACI staff. With our portfolio company staff, we just presented last month their results to them, to the portfolio company founders. Similar high points in terms of being mission-driven, impact. Area of opportunity for them is fairness. Because they're startups, I think a lot of the employees were unsatisfied with how their compensation ranked at a startup versus but like a compensation they would be able to get in the private sector. So, and then the founders were like, well, if you helped us with investment, then we would not have to worry so much about the funding piece, but really figuring out how to equip our founders then with the same tools that we had to engage their employees in a similar discussion.
Any other questions in the audience?
Hi, I'm Brian, a first-year full-time student. Thanks for being here. And I'm a member of the Impact Investing Fund that we have at Anderson. And one of the things that we're thinking about, and I'm really curious to hear your thoughts of, is how you measure impact and like compare that across portfolio companies. I know you have a very focused kind of mission, but still, I'm sure portfolio companies come at this from different angles, and I'm wondering how you cross-compare.
Yeah, absolutely. So in 2017, we launched our very first Just Impact report with our portfolio companies. So it tracked all of our portfolio company metrics across 3 pillars of sustainability, so economic, environmental, and social. And by nature of us being a clean tech incubator that's focused on inclusion, and we want them to survive and make money, almost all of our companies are able to achieve all 3, which is terrific. So in terms of what we would track, so for the economic piece, it would be revenue generated. For the environmental piece, it would be GHG reduction, waste diverted, water savings. And then for the social piece, it would be like employment of underrepresented groups, including women and people of color. And so we did that in 2017. We just did it again in 2019. And we're actually have been modeling this. So we're in an incubator network with other clean tech incubators that we're working to deploy the same kind of impact collection model with them, which has been a great exercise for us. But yeah, to your point, I also am curious to figure out, like, what does success mean in terms of looking at a portfolio company? Like, how much should they jump from year to year in terms of all of those factors? So, I mean, we have a baseline, but I'd be curious and would love to chat more to figure out what success really looks like over time.
You had mentioned, you just kind of alluded to the fact that you have a network of incubators, clean tech incubators, and you're looking at what impact could look like across the gamut. How much of your role is some of that market shifting and education of what exemplary models could look like in the community?
Yes.
And across the country, really, I would say.
Yeah. So so in terms of how to other models across the country. So in 2 weeks, I'm actually going to Chicago to visit with ICIC, the Initiative for Competitive Intercity, as a grantee of JP Morgan Chase. We had gotten a grant as part of their Small Business Forward cohort. So we have periodic, almost like professional development sessions where all of the funded incubators get to share best practices about what's working well, what's not in their respective organizations. So when I go to Chicago in 2 weeks, the focus is actually impact and data measurement. So I'm going to share with them the work that we've been doing around our inclusion survey. And hopefully that helps inform the ones who have not started along that process yet. But I'm also there to learn about how they're tracking and measuring, because it doesn't make sense to reinvent the wheel, and we're always trying to figure out how to network with each other so we can best support each other in our shared goals.
And is that a network of just clean tech incubators or just any incubators?
All over, any incubator funded by JP
So
Morgan.
the conversation is on impact across all
incubators. Yeah.
Fascinating. I'd love to hear feedback from
Me
that.
too.
So the other thing I wanted to talk to you about was, here at Anderson, Impact at Anderson was established a couple years ago, as I've mentioned to you, to essentially start promoting how business can be a force for social change, and this idea that social and environmental issues are not limited to the public sector. Obviously, diversity and inclusion is a big part of that, and I'm curious in terms of kind of thinking about large-scale shifts in the sector, specific to the clean tech sector. What are you noticing in larger corporations? Do you work with larger corporations? What are some of the trends that are happening there in terms of being able to adopt some of these best emerging practices coming out of startups into the larger force field? For
sure, yeah. So I think one benefit that we have as a smaller nonprofit is that we're nimble. So we can create initiatives and follow through as quickly as possible and iterate. For larger corporations, so for example, a couple that we work with, JP Morgan Chase, EY, Metro, one thing that I've noticed is they're putting capacity towards diversity and inclusion. So some organizations are actually creating a position specifically focused on diversity and inclusion, which is great. And then they're creating metrics and tracking so you can actually be transparent about your diversity inclusion work, where you've been and where you're headed. Another thing that I've seen is in large corporations, the formation of employee resource groups. So there could be a group specifically focused, I'm Filipino, so it could be like a Filipino collaborative, or it could be a women's group. So trying to figure out ways to really build community despite it being such a large corporation where people could, feel disconnected.
Right. Okay. And then what have been some of your biggest challenges so far in, trying to spread diversity and inclusion across the sector?
Yes, excellent question. So I think for us, when we first started, it was really making the business case for diversity and inclusion, because a lot of people were like, oh, it's a nice to have, but we really need to make money first. And we're like, wait. Diversity actually leads to you making money, and it helps companies become more innovative because you have more diverse minds at the table. So it was like the first part was just the mind shifting and helping people to understand the true business value of diversity and inclusion. That's part one. And then the part two is, even if you do understand it, are you actually walking the walk with it? So theoretically, you could really be into diversity inclusion, but your actions may not mirror that. And so we're all a work in progress. So I think even with our staff, we all try to catch each other in moments where, we could really do a better job around embodying our D&I values. So I think I shared a little bit earlier, but last year, we did a workshop for all of our LACI staff, as well as our portfolio company founders, around unpacking their own unconscious biases, ways that they have kind of skewed the system so that they're not helping themselves around diversity and inclusion. So it's really just taking a look at each individual person if they're willing to really commit to that change.
Audience, questions?
Hi, so my name is Luis, and I had a question around some of the things you mentioned right now. So over the last few years, the tech giants have started to add, chief diversity officer and, additional initiatives. But, going on 4 or 5 years now, we've seen these things being implemented, but at least me personally, it feels like there hasn't really been much traction. I'd like to get your thoughts on if change is actually occurring, or if it's not, maybe what have been the road bumps that you think are leading to sort of a standstill around that?
Oh, that's an excellent point and a very heated topic, because they're tracking it, but it's like moving very, very slowly. I think a lot of it is very systemic too. So I don't know if any of you all know about the Annenberg Tech's Pledge LA initiative that's focused on diversifying like the VC. So the VC landscape. So I think a lot of it has to start from within. So we can, have one. That's one of the challenges too about having just one person who's in charge of diversity and inclusion. Kind of lives like in a silo. So they're like, oh, that person's going to take care of it. When in reality, diversity and inclusion should be a through line throughout all of the functions of the organization. So I think that's been one of the roadblocks, is like that it's been relegated to a specific person's responsibility and not every single person's responsibility. And then I feel like we have to figure out how to actually build in systems such that it becomes a norm. So with the work we're doing around LACI, diversity inclusion, our dream would be not to have to exist anymore, because everyone else is already embodying those values. And I feel like for the big organizations that have a chief diversity officer, I think it still kind of lives off in a silo, and I think it has to be much more integrated.
It's almost the kind of where CSR in a way was a while ago, where it was a single person kind of doing this and potentially marketing or PR, and a lot of companies now are starting to see the shared value component of it or embedding it into, so potentially, hopefully, the thread happens across the board moving forward.
Exactly.
Any other audience questions?
Have you seen any examples of a transition where a company feels as if they have reached a certain point of like where the culture is truly embodying inclusion values and diversity values, and because sometimes it's difficult to go, this problem, I mean, it seems like a continuous thing, right?
Yes.
It has to be really truly embedded and constantly practiced. So what would that transition really look like? I mean, if you have a team of D&I workers,
Yeah, excellent. So as one example, we have a portfolio company called Ampere. They're working to become the Tesla of aviation, so they're electrifying planes. And since they started with us, they have been phenomenal in terms of embodying our D&I values. They've joined, it was a primarily all-male team. They joined our Women in Clean Tech work. They joined our advisory council. And I could really see them earnestly trying to make a difference because they knew that it would help their bottom line as well. So they, just a couple of highlights, because they knew their team was almost entirely comprised of men, they made a conscious decision to recruit female talent. They have given me their job applications for me to look through for inclusive language to make sure that they were utilizing words that would really invite underrepresented groups to apply. So just little things like that in terms of getting guidance and advice on how to build the structure from the ground up has been huge. So they are thriving. They have actually moved out of our incubator. They've hatched, I guess, and now they're in Hawthorne by Tesla and SpaceX, by the airport. So it shows. Like, I look at their team page now, and it's so diverse because they consciously worked on it. As you said, it's a habit, day in and day out.
Hi, I'm Kevin. You answered about half of it there. So the second half is just during the hiring process, have you seen any changes in the way you assess candidates? Obviously, you have like the direct diversity point, but maybe, the interview process or some other aspects that you kind of modified to incorporate that.
Yes, exactly. So I guess in the interview process, a couple of things that we've learned about through our D&I work was to make sure that even just the hiring, like the people and the interviewers are diverse. Because as a woman of color, it would be hard for me to come into a room, all white men interviewing me. So I'm just trying to think of what the experience might look like for people coming in. So we've been really conscious about trying to make sure that the interviewers represented like the diversity we're trying to embody as an organization. And then in terms of the actual interview itself, one of the pitfalls we've seen is it could be just relating to people who are very much like you, so it could just perpetuate a bro culture. Hey, so like trying to figure out how to almost pull up all of like what you're looking for in that person, the competencies that you're looking for in that person for that role. So what's been helpful for us is for every interview, we actually outline in the job description all the competencies that we have. So we're only looking at that. It's not trying to figure out, are you a culture fit? Would you be able to hang out with us after work? It's more like, hey, can you do the job? Do you have the skills to do that, instead of like our own biases affecting our decision? So just trying to separate the two parts.
And do you get pushback on that in terms of the culture fit piece? Because that is a big important piece that companies tout as being a consideration for who they bring on.
Yes.
Do you get pushback?
Our team, not entirely, because they know the reasons we're doing this.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've heard from going to culture conferences is that it's not a culture fit, it's a culture add, right? So you want to find someone who fills in a gap on your team. So it's actually a benefit if they don't fit in exactly. That's great, because it's going to make your work richer.
Right. And do you notice in the founder stories, are there certain founder stories or origin stories that tend to lend more to already having a diversity and inclusion mindset versus ones that come in? Are there any trends that you notice there?
Yes. So we have a company that's since been acquired, but it was founded by a woman, Kabira. The company was originally called Isidore Recycling. So the company recycled e-waste, and their entire employee base were people who were previously incarcerated. So she had already built in like impact and diversity inclusion from the ground up. So they were actually acquired by Homeboy Industries about 1.5 years ago, which was a wonderful success story. But I think it's definitely easier if you think about it from the ground up, because if you start later, it's much harder.
Right.
So if you start off with a founding team that's totally homogenous of 5 people, as startups grow, they typically grow by adding people they know in their network. So if you have 5 people that are all the same and you're adding new people, all of those new people are all going to be the same. So it's important when you start with diversity at the foundation.
Right. The other piece that you talked about, which I think is maybe tends to receive less attention, is inclusivity in decision making and transparency in decision making. How are some of the portfolio companies starting to do that and kind of building off of what LACI has been doing and
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't have visibility into our companies like day to day, but I think that's one of the things we've done, because this culture and platform for our inclusion survey has been super helpful, is we gave access to all of our portfolio company founders their company-specific data. So based on their lowest scores, it actually gives you like tips on how to address like pain points specifically. Oh, wow. So whether it was in decision making or whether it was in voice, they have a specific like action card that tells them what to do with their teams.
Okay. And then you're going to measure that on a kind of yearly basis?
Yes.
Or? Okay.
So now we have a baseline.
Okay. Wonderful. I want to, before I come back to the audience for questions, I want to kind of shift a little bit, because I'm sure that people in the audience are curious about your professional journey.
Sure.
And how you got to where you are. And, we have a lot of students in the audience that are focused on social impact careers and kind of staying true to purpose and all of that. So just a little bit of like your career path and how did you know you wanted to be here? Was this sort of like a, kind of winding path? And how did you get here?
Yes. Very, very winding path. So I think what has helped me just throughout my entire career is having a North Star. So I actually participated in Leadership LA a while ago, and as part of that program, we created personal mission statements. So mine was to embody a spirit of self-discovery so that I can empower others to achieve their full potential. So I'll try to be the best version of myself so that I can empower others to be the best version of themselves. So it almost didn't matter like what I did, it's why I did it and how I did it. So my background leading up to working at LACI has been kind of all over the place. In college, I was pre-med and I studied neuroscience because my mom was a doctor and she wanted me to be a doctor, so I studied that in college. And then after, my first job out of college was working as a financial analyst at Goldman Sachs because my dad was a banker and wanted me to be a banker. And then I was like, what do I want to do? So then I was like, I really like education. So I became a first grade teacher for a couple of years, and I was like, I really like education. So then I went and got my master's in education. And then ended up, before coming to LACI, I worked at another 4-letter acronym, NIFTY, Network for Teaching Entrepreneurship, which provided school-based entrepreneurship for middle and high school students from low-income communities. And I was like, there's no way like this job actually can combine all the things I love. But I was like, it does. Like it has finance in it, it has education in it. And then now layering on top LACI, I was like, wow, all the stuff I did in STEM and neuroscience, I can bring that in too. So the winding path, like I feel like it's been great in the sense that I can connect the dots going backwards, but going forwards, I'm like, my parents were like, what are you doing? You were like here, and then you're over here, and then, but I wouldn't have it any other way because every experience led me to where I am today. So.
Yeah. That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
But I also wanted to ask if you had any advice for folks graduating here in the next few months or in a year or 2 years with their MBAs, kind of potentially either going into traditional business, careers or finding their own winding paths to impact on kind of how they can pay attention to opportunities and kind of be open to the self-discovery that you talked about that you created as your mission.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I think one piece of advice would be to figure out your own personal true north, and it's different for everybody. So to figure out what your own personal mission statement is, like why are you on this planet? What are you here to do? And then as you're exploring opportunities, one thing that's been really helpful for me in relationships too, this is actually like a good point. I actually would write the qualities down in what I would want in a relationship or what I would want in a job. So I think having that down will be really helpful in terms of informing your vetting process. So looking at writing out everything you would want in terms of like the types of things you would like to do in this job. What would you wake up doing? What impact do you want to have? How close to the impact do you want to be? What type of sector do you want to be in? And like just write it all down. And then as you're vetting opportunities, like check it off. Does it meet this? Does it not meet this? And it's been really helpful for me in terms of being much more objective and staying true to who I am because it's against my own true north, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's easy to get overwhelmed, obviously. I'm sure you guys are feeling that a little bit right now, but so it's nice to hear that for sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
If there are no other questions, I'm going to invite everybody to join me in welcoming Estelle with a round of applause and follow up with the reception.
Thank you
so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.